Is slowing down your eccentric phase and resistance training actually helping or hurting your gains? Today, we're breaking down the latest systematic review and meta-analysis on eccentric phase duration and its effects on strength, muscle growth, and the counter movement jump. If you're a coach or an athlete looking to optimize training adaptations, this is an episode you won't want to miss. Let's explore. So let's start with why eccentric training even matters, right? We gotta set the stage before we dive into the science. Eccentric training is not just about lowering the weight. It's about controlling force or force acceptance or quote unquote absorption, although technically that's not correct, and maximizing adaptations, right? In the eccentric phase of a lift, which just so we're all on the same page, is the lowering portion. So think on the way down during squats, it's the lowering portion. This is gonna influence neuromuscular activation, mechanical tension, time under tension, especially when you're using tempos, tendon and muscle stiffness, muscle damage and remodeling of muscles and tendons. A ton is going to be downstream from eccentric training. And coaches and researchers have debated for years whether slow eccentrics, think 3 to 5 second tempos, or faster eccentrics, 1 to 2 seconds. They've debated which is better for strength, which is better for muscle hypertrophy, which is better for explosiveness, right? Jumping and sprinting and cutting, and generally which is better for athletes. But rather than getting into the debates, let's just break down the science. Let's just get to the literature. So what does the research actually say? Let's break it all down in today's episode. To begin, let's talk about the key findings from the latest meta-analysis from Ramsey and King, a 2024 systematic review and meta-analysis. We're gonna start with the counter movement jump, right? The CMJ, and what happens to the CMJ performance when dealing with fast versus slow eccentrics. Faster eccentrics, again, think 1 to 2 seconds, significantly improved jump height. Now, why is that, right? The key mechanism behind this won't be a surprise if you're a strength coach, better stretch shortening cycle function. The faster you lower under control, the greater stored elastic energy that you can bottle up and then use during the concentric phase or the propulsive phase during jumping. Whereas slowing down the eccentrics actually will diminish the power output because it's going to disrupt the elastic recoil effect. It's going to disrupt and minimize that stretch shortening cycle effect. You just won't store as much elastic energy and you therefore won't be able to use it. So the takeaway is if your goal is to increase jump height, sprint speed, or explosive power, then you're going to want to keep the eccentrics relatively fast. Again, under control, but 1 to 2 seconds with some intent. Now, that's not the only study to suggest this. There's a 2017 paper that also suggested something very similar. Slower eccentrics reduce stretch shortening cycle efficiency and negatively impact explosive movements, right? And the research continued to pile up. 2021, we had another study, fast eccentric training improved agility and jumping more than slow eccentric training methods. So generally speaking, when it comes to sporting tasks, we like to use a faster, albeit under control, eccentric so that we can train that stretch shortening cycle efficiency, we can store more elastic energy and really just give us more money in the bank for the propulsive action. That's kind of how I think about it. We want to store that elastic energy, that's money in the bank that we can now use when we go to explode in our sporting task. So for athletes, we like fast eccentrics, again 1 to 2 seconds for explosive movements. What about for max strength? No major differences between fast versus slow eccentrics in untrained individuals. However, in trained individuals, slower eccentric phases will actually improve strength a little bit more, or at least have potential to improve strength a little bit more. And here's why. Slower eccentrics will allow for greater force output because the eccentric phase generates more absolute force than the concentric phase. So you can technically load up the eccentric phase much more than the concentric phase. Increased motor unit recruitment and control will also come from slowing down the eccentrics, and this is going to be useful for skilled lifters who need to fine-tune their technique and their joint stability. And this is not the only research that has shown this. In 2021, slow eccentrics 4 to 6 seconds was compared to faster eccentrics, and the slow eccentrics enhanced neural drive and strength gains, particularly in those advanced lifters. 2017, another study, eccentric training induced greater strength gains compared to concentric only training due to greater neuromuscular adaptations. And so the coaching takeaways, if you're a beginner or intermediate athlete, you're not going to get a ton of benefit from slowing down the eccentrics. So focus more on load and intent, although I do like it for learning the movement. So if you're learning a movement, slow it down a little bit and learn how to do it appropriately. If you're an advanced lifter, use 3 to 5 second eccentrics to reinforce technique, to increase some time under tension, and to drive some more neuromuscular adaptation. And if you're really advanced, you can use things like weight releasers to overload that eccentric portion compared to that concentric portion. But I would save that for your more advanced athletes or if you're an advanced lifter. Okay, so we've talked sporting tasks, counter movement jumps, sprinting, cutting. We talked strength. Let's spend a moment on hypertrophy. No major hypertrophic or hypertrophy differences between fast and slow eccentrics when total training volume is equated. Slower eccentrics, again 3 to 5 seconds in duration, increase time under tension, but often reduce the total volume load. And this is because you typically have to use less load and because the fatigue per set is gonna become higher because you're spending more time during that set. Faster eccentrics, again 1 to 2 seconds, will end up with higher volume, resulting in similar muscle growth without the excessive fatigue. And this again is not the only research to suggest this. In fact, Brad Schoenfeld, perhaps the leading researcher in hypertrophy in the world, in 2015 published a paper, Time Under Tension is important for hypertrophy, but only up into a point. Excessively slow reps, again, is gonna reduce that total volume and intensity and drive more fatigue. In 2018, Hackett published a paper, Eccentric Duration doesn't drive hypertrophy as much as total volume and mechanical tension. And time under tension is not necessarily the same thing as mechanical tension. So some coaching takeaways, right? For muscle growth, you wanna focus on progressive overload and total volume, not just slowing down the eccentric. If you want to optimize hypertrophy, maybe consider mixing in some eccentric tempos depending on the phase that you're in. Slower 3 to 5 second eccentric in early phases for control and tension, faster 1 to 2 seconds in later phases for efficiency, and to overload, increase volume load, reduce fatigue, right? Some advanced coaching stuff here. When should you use slow eccentrics? Let's start with that. Rehab for sure, a great option early on. Perhaps some injury prevention stuff, although at the end of the day, we have to prepare our athletes for sport. Slower eccentrics can improve tendon strength and motor control. Think about the patellar, think about the Achilles. ACL rehab comes to mind. Skill acquisition, what about that? Slower eccentrics allows athletes to refine technique. And again, I mentioned early in off season with the athlete to teach the movement to groove that pattern. I like some slow tempos. What about for peaking? If you're an advanced athlete, slow eccentrics can be used 4 to 6 weeks out from competition just to build some of that absolute strength, to groove those patterns, to make sure you're technically sound going into competition. When should you use fast eccentrics, right? If that's when you're using slow eccentrics, what about fast? Think about power and speed development, right? If you need to jump higher, you need to sprint faster, you need to cut quicker, all of those things, explosive tasks, then you want to train for fast eccentric tempos because of that stretch shortening cycle efficiency. High volume training comes to mind. Faster eccentrics is going to reduce the fatigue, allowing for higher overall work and capacity. And then finally, in-season programming. Slower eccentrics can be fatiguing, so you want to use these sparingly. Fast eccentric tempos allow you to actually train the quality that's transferred in season, that becomes important, and reduce that fatigue. Some final takeaways on the way out: faster eccentric tempos, 1 to 2 seconds, will improve jump performance and power, whereas slower eccentrics may improve strength in trained individuals, right? Not so much in those untrained individuals. Hypertrophy is not gonna be highly affected by slow or fast eccentrics, but instead is gonna be driven by total volume, not eccentric tempo alone. You're also gonna wanna get close to failure. Use slow eccentrics to teach strategically, for control, for rehab, and then for peaking in sport. And you're gonna wanna use those fast eccentrics for explosive power and speed, high volume training. And last but not least, drop me a comment below if you're on YouTube. Let me know how you're using tempos, and let's have a conversation.